Starting again, this is page 400 in the year 1191, which even his bigoted enemies were obliged to acknowledge and admire. The English monarch, equally martial and brave, was more merciless and ferocious, and by his barbarity tarnished the lustre of his victories. When Saladin refused to ratify the capitulation of Acre, the King of England ordered all his prisoners, to the amount of 5,000, to be butchered, and the Saracens found themselves obliged to retaliate upon the Christians by a similar cruelty. Saladin died at Damascus soon after concluding this truce with the princes of the Crusade. It is memorable that before he expired, he ordered his winding sheet to be carried as a standard through every street of the city, while a crier went before him and proclaimed with a loud voice, "This is all that remains to the mighty Saladin, the conqueror of the East." By his last will, he ordered charities to be distributed to the poor, without distinction of Jew, Christian, or Mahometan. After the truce was concluded, the King of England, having nothing to detain him in Palestine, hastened to Europe, where his presence was required. As he dared not to pass through France, having too much reason to dread the perfidy of Philip, he failed to the Adriatic, and, being shipwrecked near Aquileia, attempted to traverse Germany in the disguise of a pilgrim. Pursued by the governor of Istria, he was compelled to leave the direct road to England and pass by Vienna, where he was discovered by Leopold, Duke of Austria, who, glad of so favourable an opportunity to revenge an affront he had sustained from Richard during the siege of Acre, and being equally deaf to the dictates of honour and restless of the ties of humanity, ordered him to be arrested and thrown into prison. He afterwards sold his royal captive to the Emperor Henry VI for the sum of 50,000 marks. Thus, a monarch who had filled the whole world with his renown found himself, during the most critical state of his affairs, confined in a dungeon and loaded with irons in the heart of Germany, and entirely at the mercy of his enemy, the basest and most sordid of mankind. The expedition of Philip had terminated more successfully. On his return to France, he found the regents of the kingdom had discharged their trust with honour and diligence. The whole nation was tranquil and flourishing, and he had nothing to interrupt his repose but his own ambition and thirst for conquest. The first thing that excited his attention was a crime imputed to some Jews who, it was pretended, had, with the permission of the Countess of Champagne, seized a Christian, placed a crown of thorns upon his head, and having severely scourged him, nailed him to a cross, and there suffered him to expire. Philip, on being apprised of this circumstance, hastened to the castle of Bray-upon-Seine, where the crime was said to be committed, and ordered 80 Jews to be burnt alive. The guilt of these unfortunate victims appears to be a matter of doubt, since no mention is made of any punishment inflicted on the Countess of Champagne, who was certainly an accomplice in the crime, if there was really any crime committed. Philip's next care was to extend his dominions, an object that was ever uppermost in his thoughts, for which purpose he took the necessary measures for uniting the crown, not only the county of Artois, his late queen's dower, but the county of Flanders, which he pretended the death of Philip of Alsace, who left no male issue, had rendered vacant. In vain did Baldwin V, who as nephew and heir to the Count had taken possession of the territory in question, prove to him by 1,000 recent examples that this province was not subject to the Salic law. His ambition was deaf to the powering for war, when the interposition of some mutual friends effected an accommodation which had appeared impracticable. A treaty was signed at Péronne, by which Baldwin was acknowledged for Count of Flanders, and did homage for his principality to the French monarch. Philip had Artois, and, as that county was his wife's dower to the French monarch, his dower to his wife's dower, he made his son Louis assume the title of Count of Artois. But his ambition led him to insist on the cession of the sovereignty of Boulogne, Guienne, Saint-Paul, and l'Île. To insist on, so here he is, he's insist on the cession of those, which gave rise to that inveterate animosity and those cruel wars, which afterwards prevailed between the French and Flemings. In 1193 AD, Philip had no sooner regulated all necessary matters relating to his new acquisitions than he received the news of Richard's detention, when, forgetful of his oaths, he determined to sacrifice his honour to his interest, and to convert the misfortune of his rival into a source of advantage to himself. He made the emperor the most flattering offers to induce him to deliver his royal prisoner into his hands, or at least to detain him in perpetual captivity. He even formed an alliance with the King of Denmark by espousing his sister, Ingelberga, desired that the obsolete claim of the Danes to the crown of England should be transferred to him, and solicited a supply of shipping to enforce it. But the most successful of his negotiations was with Prince John, who on the first invitation suddenly left England, had a conference with Philip, and concluded a treaty, the object of which was the ruin of a brother, to whom he was bound by every tie of honour, allegiance, and gratitude. He agreed to cede to the king all the Vexin-Loche, Montbaison, and Châtillon upon the Indre. When this treaty, which fixed an indelible infamy on the contracting parties, was concluded, the king invaded Normandy, took Gifford, Neuchâtel, Ivry, Évreux, and Aumale, and proceeded to form the siege of Rouen. Here, however, he was repulsed with the considerable loss, and the check he experienced soon it induced him to listen to the proposals of the Norman barons, and on condition of being paid a large sum of money, to sign a truce for 6 months. Philip, having discovered, says Vellet, some secret defect in his bride Ingelberga, that the first night of their marriage resolved to obtain a divorce, and an obsequious council assembled at Compiègne, favouring his views, pronounced the marriage null on the usual grounds of consanguinity. The unfortunate queen appealed to the Pope, who, moved by her complaints and the serious remonstrances of her brother, sent 2 legates into France to examine the validity of the divorce. But, to use the language of record, they were 2 dumb dogs who feared for their skin, and therefore did not dare to bark. So they were dogs who did not dare to bark. The king, thinking himself authorized by the forbearance of the legate to annul the sentence of the Council of Compiègne to contract a new marriage, asked and obtained the hand of Agnes, daughter to the Duke of Dalmatia, a princess of great beauty and illustrious birth. But the fate of Ingelberga excited the pity of the nation, and on the accession of Innocent III to the papal dignity, the thunders of the Church were employed to avenge her cause. The Cardinal of Capua, by the Pope's orders, convened a council at Dijon, where, notwithstanding an appeal to Rome, the commissaries of the court laid all the dominions of Philip under an interdict. The bishops who were present submitted to the sentence, although some of them had attended the Council of Compiègne and had consequently sanctioned with their approbation that divorce which was now declared null. Philip, enraged at their conduct, seized on their temporalities, confiscated the possessions of all the canons and other ecclesiastics in their dioceses, sent soldiers into the parsonage houses, and confined Queen Ingelberga in the castle of Étampes. The murmurs of the murmurs, here we are. Where am I? Yeah. Of the laity at the discontinuation of divine service were punished by the most oppressive exactions. The citizens and peasants were obliged to submit to the most onerous imposts, and a tax of 1/3 of their revenue was imposed on the nobility. This unprecedented severity only served to increase the murmurs of discontent, and the kingdom was now in the state of violence, which is never of long continuance. No external forms of religion appeared, no sacrament was administered, and no public devotion performed. The churches were everywhere shut, and the dead remained without burial. All right, that's a short one today. I'm just going to stop. I'm testing my sound. I'm trying to bring it down and fix it somehow.